All right, Nate, thank you very much. Every Wednesday, we should sit down with Sheriff Joe Lombardo for our Morning Cup of Joe segment. And look who it is. It's Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Answering viewer questions as we do. And let's get right into things here. Let's start talking about something we've addressed in the show earlier. Last week, a grand jury deciding not to charge former Metro officer Kenneth LaPera for the unapproved chokehold in the death of Tashi Farmer. Just get some perspective from you, perhaps, on what took place, the reaction that you've had from seeing how this played out, and just some perspective.
Well, it was interesting from the beginning. You know, we just, as an organization, or the police department, decided to charge Ken LaPera. We submitted those charges to the district attorney, and the district attorney takes it upon themselves to decide whether to move forward, the validity of the charges, what form to take the case per se, and the district attorney chose the grand jury. So, as you mentioned, the grand jury decided not to indict. And the grand jury is done in secrecy, so we're not privy to exactly what the jury members were thinking, or their decision process, or what was the actual point of contention for them not to indict. So, at this point, the district attorney has to make a decision to take it to the regular process, either through a preliminary hearing, or just step back, send it to the Police Fatality Review Board, and present that in the public forum.
But certainly, at least from Metro's point of view, since you recommended charges, it's Metro's point of view that Mr. LaPera broke the law.
Yeah, and within the policy and the law, as far as the level of use of force.
Okay. A couple other cases we've had recently around the valley, domestic violence cases ending in deaths of individuals around the valley. What is your response to some of these recent cases, and how are officers trained to handle specifically domestic violence issues?
Yeah, you are correct. There has been an increase in domestic violence with murder associated with it. In my jurisdiction, right around 22, I believe it is, which would be around 25% of our total murders taking place here today, are directly related to domestic violence. Yeah. You know, it's a point of contention, or actually it's not a point of contention, it's a point of concern for me as a head of law enforcement, because that's a very common call for our police officers to respond to on a daily basis. And it's important for them to raise it to the appropriate level of their concern and the investigation associated with it. Because we all know it's a crime of passion. It's a crime that tends to escalate over time if it's not addressed. So I think the most important piece is for people are usually aware of it, you know, either through family members or friends, for them to seek help for the individual who may be in a position where they can't seek help themselves. Sure. But as far as law enforcement, it's important for us to do the proper investigation and follow-up, ensure that we're dotting the I's to get them the help that is needed, because it could escalate unbeknownst to us. Yeah. So your question was, how are we trained? Well, because it's such a common call for us, and it's a big part of what we do. We're extensively trained on how to deal with it, how to provide the resources for the individual victim, how to recognize it, and ensure we do the right things associated with it.
Try and stop the cycle at some point, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Another issue that we've been covering here at 8 News Now has to deal with opioid abuse. We've done some special reports on this. Can you give some idea of how big of an issue it is here in the Valley from a law enforcement standpoint?
You know, that's a great question. It's a timely question, because recently in a conference that I attended, that was the conversation that was taking place. How is the opioid issue affecting law enforcement across the United States? So if you look at it in statistical numbers, I believe the last numbers I've seen in 16 is the most recent update, is right around 65,000 ODs across the United States. So that's the most common cause of death for Americans under the age of 50. We've never reached those numbers before, so it's something that has a big concern of ours. So how does law enforcement deal with it? Well, it's more of a medical health issue than it is a law enforcement issue. I don't want to, you know, minimize it, but it's I guess would it be partnership. For us to solve this issue, it requires us to have a partnership with all the resources available to deal with it. Now, law enforcement in particular, I believe the opioid epidemic directly relates to our property crime issue. So these individuals that go from legal prescriptions and eventually illegal heroin per se, or fentanyl. It requires a lot of cash to fund that habit. And how do they get their cash? Property crimes, victimize people in order to pay for it. And if you look at our property crime numbers year to date, we're flat, and we were down the previous year. And in my opinion, I could directly relate it to that type of issue that we're dealing with.
Okay. Well, Sheriff, thank you very much for joining us again this morning, taking some questions from us. We'll take some questions from viewers as well. If you have a question for Sheriff Joe Lombardo, you can submit it at LasVegasNow.com. Look for the link on the right side of the page, and you can find out if your question was answered every Wednesday. Nia?